Richard Willams was a fierce defender of his family. He was an artist ahead of his time with a quest to share a vision for a masterpiece with the world. He also accomplished so much more in his life that really should be highlighted. So let's get to highlighting. Richard Edmund Willams was born in Toronto, eh? Born in Toronto, eh? Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is your Canadian narrator speaking. Maybe you didn't know I was Canadian, and that's entirely my point. We don't actually end every sentence with, eh? Anyway, I'm so sorry to interrupt, eh? I'll stop acting like a hoser now and return to the video. Richard Edmund Willams was born in Toronto on March 19, 1933. As a child, he was fascinated by Disney's productions.
I saw Snow White when I was 5, and I was startled. You know, I thought, God, I want to do that when I grow up. In fact, I'm going to do that when I grow up. My mother was an illustrator, so I was a sophisticated little kid. I'd grown up in commercial art studios. And I knew that those were drawings, all done. And I wanted to be an animator. I visited Disney's when I was 15, and they took me in and did stories about me.
These stories were a 1947 publicity stunt where the company allowed Willams in for 2 days on the strength of his artwork. After, art director Dick Kelsey told him to go off and learn to draw. Ooh, harsh, dude. This obviously made him lose interest in animation. Instead, he turned to a different facet of art.
But then I saw Rembrandt when I was 16. I just turned 16. And when I saw Rembrandt, I thought, cartoons are stupid. I mean, they're still ridiculous. And then I painted for the next 8 years.
Following studies in the Ontario College of Art, he left Canada and settled in Ibiza, where he lived for 2 years and became a painter, finding inspiration in the clowns and performers at a local circus. What a strange journey that was to read.
But I couldn't stand the art world. I couldn't stand the idea of doing paintings for rich industrialists' wives and that whole art world. It was just repulsive as a way of life.
What is most interesting about this part of Richard's life is how much it resembles another great animator, Bill Tytla. Both of them had traveled abroad to study and practice static art after working with animation, and both eventually realized that animation could be more than what was currently being realized. Dang, if only there was a way to learn more about Bill Tytla. Oh, great balls of fire, what is that? Look, a link to our Bill Tytla video.
And then, when I was about 22 or 23, I kept thinking, wait a minute, animation could be different. I suddenly saw what animation could do. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to go into, that's going to be horrible. I'll have to go in and be a commercial artist again. I don't want to do that. I mean, in order to get the money, to get the equipment, to get the knowledge, oh dear. I thought, I'll do that when I'm 40. And and I tried to stop. I spent 6 months trying not to do it. And then I realized, oh my gosh, you can put the sound with it, you know, and you can use music in that. Oh, Lord. And I just got more and more involved and started my first film, The Little Island.
While still in Ibiza, Willams began to draw storyboards for an animated film about 3 misguided idealists. In 1955, Willams left Ibiza and moved to England, where he began working at fellow Canadian George Dunning's company, TV Cartoons Limited. Working mainly on television commercials, he also began developing his own animated short film, The Little Island. The enormous success of The Little Island launched his career, and the critical and financial success of Willams' next short, Love Me, Love Me, Love Me, enabled him to establish his own company, Richard Willams Animation Limited. He made the short film A Lecture on Man that same year. This just makes me think, Animator's Shark Tank would be a great idea. Jotting that down for CNBC. He was still very skeptical of commercial work, however, and considered it a means to pay for his passion projects. One day, he went to a Copenhagen film weekend, because dude loves his flight miles.
Lindsay Anderson was supposed to go, but he didn't go, and I went in his place because they had some animation studio people over there. So anyway, I went as a representative of British cinema, and I got loaded at a party. Clive Donner had spent 5 years doing baby food commercials at J. Walter Thompson's, and he just filmed The Caretaker, which I thought was a terrific job, and I was jumping all over him saying, "This is a really good, terrific job. How could you stand to do 5 years of commercial?" And he made a big defense for the commercials, and I said, "Oh, rubbish, you just do them for the money." And he told me off. He said, "Why don't you just stop being so smart and just try and do a good one. Try and give it all you've got, for one." And I thought, I will. I'll try it. All right, I'll try. So I tried it on this Guinness at the Albert Hall. I did the best job I was capable of then. I think it absolutely stinks now. I mean, it's amazing how little I mean, just awful. But at the time, it was thought to be very good, and it was I won a whole bunch of awards, and that really helped set me up.
Richard Williams Animation Limited eventually completed over 2,500 TV commercials and won numerous awards.
She'd asked me up to her place, and I decided to play her along.
I'll slip into something cooler.
It's Friday, man.
Cats, dogs, mice, roosters, Turner landscapes, storms, horses running, fashion women, selling Tampax, selling soap. I must have sold everything. I don't see any If I go in a supermarket, which is rare, all I see are these things I've been selling for years. With a commercial, it's very different than the way we work on the feature. It's a whole totally different thing. The agency always have their idea. I mean, we don't have the ideas for them, so they come in with the concept, which they've usually tested. They've usually done a test film called an animatic, which is they'll get an illustrator to film a storyboard with their soundtrack, a rough soundtrack, and they send that out for market research. So that's already been to, a selection of housewives and grandfathers or whatever it is, testing it. And they have the test results, and they've gone through all their committee meetings and all their stuff. And then they hunt around for the company who's going to make the thing. And so they come here because we're famous for our bag of tricks. Wouldn't choose to spend my life, I think I've made over 2,500 commercials or worked on. Well, that wouldn't be my choice of a life career, or doing fancy wrappings for feature films or making little shorts. I mean, naturally, you want to practice your craft. Well, the money comes from the commercial activities.
Starting in 1964, Williams began work on one of his greatest projects that this commercial money would finance, a film that went through many name changes but eventually would be called The Thief and the Cobbler. There are many in-depth sources for this project that you can find linked in the description, but we will summarize it here. Hit it! In 1964, Williams illustrated a series of books by Idris Shah, which collected the tales of Mullah Nasruddin, a philosophical yet wise fool of Near Eastern folklore from the 13th century. He decided to make an Arabian animated feature around this story and hired veteran Warner Bros. Animator Ken Harris as a chief animator on the project. Roy Nesbitt was hired to design backgrounds for the film, and promotional art showed intricate Indian and Persian designs. Dialogue tracks for the film were recorded at this time. Actor Vincent Price was hired to perform the voice of the villain Anwar, later renamed Zigzag. Price was hired to make the villain more enjoyable for Williams, as he was a great fan of Price's work, and Zigzag was based on two people that Williams hated. In addition to Price, Sir Anthony Quayle was cast as King Nod. And boom, there are your quick Thief and the Cobbler facts. Concurrently, Williams continued to work on commercials and titles. His 1968 titles and animated interscenes for The Charge of the Light Brigade, created in a labor-intensive editorial illustration style, drew new attention to his work and burnished his reputation for craftsmanship and quality. This brought him to the attention of another legendary director/animator.
Chuck Jones was at ABC, and he got them to hire me to do this Christmas Carol, which he wanted in the style of 1850s illustrations.
My Lincoln yard, my yard, I girded it on of my own free will.
There was a half-hour show, and everybody worked night and day, and it won an Oscar.
Now, you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
In 1975, Williams animated the title credits for Blake Edwards' Return of the Pink Panther, and in 1976 his studio completed the animated credits for The Pink Panther Strikes Again. In 1977, Williams had a chance to show audiences how far he'd come with his feature directorial debut, Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure. Because it always comes back to the true king and queen of Hollywood, Ann and Andy. To make the film, Williams set up studios in both New York and Los Angeles and put together an all-star team of industry veterans including Grim Natwick, Irv Spence, Jerry Chinicki, Art Babbitt, Tissa David, Emery Hawkins, Warren Batchelder, and Hal Ambro, as well as industry newcomers Eric Goldberg, Dan Haskett, Sue Croyer, Tom Cito, and Michael Sporn. Sort of the Avengers of art and animation. The $4 million production was one of the most lavishly animated and visually inventive cartoon features of the 1970s, but it tanked at the box office and was criticized for its slow pacing and story. Meanwhile, around 1973, Williams fell out with his business partners over the feature film Nasruddin and began to reimagine the story, which soon morphed into a new tale about a mute thief who is obsessed with stealing 3 golden balls which protect an ancient city from invasion. Williams stated that he did not intend to follow the Disney route with his film, stating that it would be the first animated film with a real plot that locks together like a detective story at the end. He also said that with its 2 mute main characters, it was essentially a silent movie with a lot of sound, turning animation on its head. Williams was learning the art of animation himself during the production of his film. His animation during the 1960s typically featured stylized designs in the vein of UPA animated shorts. Williams hired veteran animators from the golden age of animation to work at his studio in London and help teach him and his staff. Williams learned also from Milt Kahl, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, and Ken Anderson at Disney, to whom he made yearly visits. Using these lessons, Williams animated many of the scenes in the movie himself and spent years perfecting a single scene in which the villainous Vizier Zigzag shuffles a deck of cards, on which his mentor Ken Harris made a rare comment.
This is after several hours, and I was getting the drawings right, and he said, gee, Jack, he said, you're putting them almost in the right place. And I said, well, I'm learning from you, aren't I? And he said, yeah, he said, you know, you could be an animator. And I was devastated. I just sat there for a bit. I said, excuse me, Ken. I went out and I sat on the stairs out here for a while. And I had to think, no, he's right. I mean, the reason I admired him so much is that he was the real McCoy. I had been earning my living covered in awards. I wasn't really an animator. I didn't understand how to get that snap into the drawings or the timing or just, I mean, I just did animation drawings. And anyway, so I worked like hell. I had this section of a magician with cards, which turned out in the end to be Zigzag in the picture. I even wrote the scene into the picture to use this scene. It went on for years. I was trying to have this fellow work shuffling cards and spreading the cards out. And he's talking all at the same time. And I spent, when Ken went away, he would go away for 4 to 6 months to recover, because he was so old then. He must have been 70, 76, 77. Then he came back, and I had this scene, and we never discussed it. whether I was an animator or not. Again, I didn't. And then I ran this thing on the Moviola, which used to be across the hall, and I had it more or less right. And he looked up and he says, it was as if it was the conversation the year before. He said very grudgingly, he says, "All right," he says, "you are an animator."
I have power over people, though they may appear complex. For me, they fall like playing cards, and I control the decks.
As years passed, the project became more ambitious. Willams said that his idea was to make the best animated film that has ever been made. There really is no reason why not. He also envisioned the film to feature very detailed and complex animation, the likes he thought no other studio would attempt to achieve. Additionally, much of the film's animation would be photographed on ones, meaning that the animation would run at full 24 frames per second, as opposed to the more common animation on twos in 12 frames per second. Again, turning animation on its head. In 1978, a Saudi Arabian prince became interested in The Thief and agreed to fund a 10-minute test sequence with a budget of $100,000. Willams chose the complex penultimate sequence of The Thief and the War Machine for the test. The studio missed 2 deadlines, and the scene was completed in late 1979 for $250,000. Despite his positive impression of the finished scene, the prince backed out of the production because of missed deadlines and budgetary overruns. Will Richard Willams finally finish his masterpiece? Will he ever be able to touch the world with his art in the way he dreams? Tune into part 2 to find out. Or, you could do a Google search. What's that? Oh. Please do not do a Google search. But come back here for the rest of the story when it comes out. Please? Thank you to these people for supporting us on Patreon and Ko-fi. Thank you for watching this episode of Discographies. Comment below with characters you would like to see us cover. Further reading and references are linked below. We hope to see you in another Discography.